Right. Good evening. I am Nancy D'Amico from the Friends of the Blackstone Library. Today's program, 50 States of Mind, is sponsored by the Friends of the Blackstone. Friends is a 501c3, all volunteer organization whose mission is to raise money for the library to fund enhancement activities, materials, and programs such as the one you are here today for. For example, the recently installed sound system here in the auditorium was funded by Friends. In the last fiscal year, Friends was able to give the library $70,000. Money is raised through the sale of donated books, through our holiday basket sale, through membership in Friends or sponsorships and grants from our local community. To learn more about Friends and how you can become a friend to support the Blackstone Library, please pick up information and membership forms from the table in the back. There's a little form inside here to become a member. Please consider doing it if you're not already one. Tonight's speaker is Ryan Bernsten. Ryan is an award-winning speaker, author, playwright, and creative. He has worked on Hillary Clinton's electoral campaign trail and currently serves as the senior managing editor for the Trevor Project's creative team, an organization committed to ending suicide among LGBTQ youth. As a part of his drive to hear and tell stories, he traveled to all 50 states of the US to hear from the nation during the 2018 election year. Through his journey, he met mayors, governors, community leaders, and voters on both sides of the aisle to find the stories that bound Americans then and continue to today. The book he subsequently wrote, 50 States of Mind, A Journey to Rediscover American Democracy, has been featured on NPR, Talking Politics, and Condé Nast Traveler. Please welcome Ryan Bernsten.
Thank you so much, Nancy. I think I need that write-up because in an elevator, if people say, "What do you do?" I kind of draw a blank, and that is the best summary of what I've done and what I currently do. Thank you. Thank you so much. I believe I'm on film saying this, so you know I don't say this everywhere. This is the most beautiful library I have been to, and I have been to a lot of libraries. So you can fact check me later. This is the top. And thank you to the Friends of the Library. It's amazing the work you're doing here. And what a turnout. I almost feel like maybe you came for the wrong talk. The pressure is really on, but I've really come to fall in love with your community over the past 6 hours, but maybe it was the lobster orchetti at Dockside, which sold me on it. That was absolutely amazing. And I might be moving here. So. Not yet. That's if this goes well. Yeah, I'll reward myself with that. I need some flavor recommendations. So the question on the table tonight is America as divided as it seems? That was the question I set out to answer in 2018 when I was an Oxford grad student and traveled 23,000 miles to all 50 states. It started as a thesis project, and it became my book, 50 States of Mind, A Journey to Rediscover American Democracy, published last year. I don't know if you know this, but most people write a book, do a few book talks, book tours, and then forget about it and write their next book. Not me. I have become obsessed with doing these talks. What should have been a few-month process to promote the book has become my new passion, because this work I set out to do in 2018 continues today. I don't know if you noticed this about American society, but there are so few forums to have conversations about our democracy, necessary conversations. And that is what we are doing here tonight. And so I appreciate you showing up. So give yourself a round of applause for that. So I've been traveling around the world to libraries, bookstores, universities, middle schools, Hancock Shaker villages across the country to talk to people on the ground like I did with my book. And I always say at these events that I am going to walk away learning more from you than you are probably going to learn from me. And so I warn you now This is a little bit of a participatory talk. I'm going to be turning this back to you. You're going to be able to ask me some questions, but more importantly, I'm going to ask you some questions about your community at the end. So I hope you're ready for that. The subject of my research started with my work on the 2016 campaign trail. I thought I had the best job in the world as a field organizer with the Hillary Clinton campaign because I got to show up every single day and talk to people about their hopes and dreams for our democracy. Whether that was dairy farmers in Iowa, folks in upstate New York, or Haitian immigrants in Florida, my job was just to chat with people about what they wanted for our country, whether that was at a political event, outside a grocery store, or on their front porch. I felt so connected to this idea of the story of America, the story of our democracy, that I had all the optimism that a young person on a campaign feels. We were going to win this election, and I was going to go be a do-gooder in Washington, D.C., working at an agency, and that's how I was going to make the world a better place. I'm not sure if everyone remembers what happened in 2016, but that is not what ended up happening in my life. I was out of a job, I was unemployed, and I moved back to my home in New York City with no prospects and frankly very depressed because I had to tell myself the story of America through the news, through news feeds, through social media feeds. And it didn't match the America that I saw on the ground. And I felt like I had to get out there and hear from people again, but I wasn't a field organizer. The campaign was over. So I came up with this obsession of the story of America, and I did what obsessed people do. I wrote a grad school application essay, and I was accepted to the University of Oxford. And so all of a sudden, I was leaving America behind, going to the UK, and not thinking about the election anymore for about 3 days. I got to Britain and immediately started annoying all of my British friends with late night pub assessments about American politics. And they were annoyed because they had problems of their own in 2017 over there. So I decided to channel it into a studious project. I came up with this idea that I was going to follow in the footsteps of Alexis de Tocqueville and travel to all 50 states and pitch it to my department. And of course, that was completely unrealistic and ridiculous. But when I brought it to them, I assumed they would help me whittle it down to something more manageable. Instead, the faculty at my Oxford graduate programs rubber stamped the gambit and said, "All right, Ryan, time to go to all 50 states." I was like, "I'm sorry, what?" Like, "Well, you proposed it. It sounds ambitious. It sounds exciting. Go ahead." I was like, "Well, I don't have any money." So they gave me a small grant, and I am talking small enough to get me to maybe 4 states in. And it presented me with this incredible problem that became an incredible gift. Because I had such little money, I couldn't stay in 5-star hotels. I couldn't even stay in crappy motels. I had to stay with people all across the country, and that ended up being the greatest gift that I could have gotten, because I had to rely on the generosity of the American people. I went to social media and I told people about this huge predicament I was in, and all of a sudden people were overflowing with excitement, saying, "I have an aunt in West Virginia who would host you. I have a cousin I haven't talked to for a while in Baton Rouge. I'm sure she'd put you up for a night." Within a week, I had places to stay in all 50 states. And this was a very important distinction from what other celebrities were doing after the 2016 election. I'm not sure if you remember, they would show up and film a roundtable discussion with a family from Pennsylvania and then go stay in a 5-star hotel and fly back to LA. I actually had to stay with these people from morning until the next day. I would eat at their dinner tables, and I could not be picky. If people were allowing me into their homes, I had to say, "Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, sir. Thank you for letting me sleep in your garage, on the floor of your den, in your daughter's room." Obviously not with the daughter there, but like if she was off at college or something. And it gave me this gift because not only did I stay in people's homes, I got to sit down with them at their dinner tables, and I got to have conversations with them. When you're writing a book about American democracy, it obviously comes up a little bit. And what surprised me so much was how quickly conversations about politics became human stories. Stories about the job that had been lost, the child that had been lost far too young, the friendship that broke over politics. And I realized that we weren't talking about politics at all. People wanted the opportunity to tell their stories. And that is what ultimately I found united us. The two main things I want you to take away from us after you silence your cell phones. That was a good ringtone. I've heard worse. The first thing is that people wanted me to see the good in their communities. Everywhere I went, and it didn't matter if I was in Monterey, California, or Cleveland, Ohio, people were excited to show me the good things that were happening all around us. I could understand this. I am from a town called Rockford, Illinois, which when I was growing up in 2010, you know Rockford, Illinois? You're okay. Do you know this fact right here, that it was the third most miserable city in America when I was growing up in 2010? And even growing up in the third most miserable city in America, according to Forbes, I feel an incredible amount of hometown pride. If people are coming from out of the country to Chicago, I say, I've got to show you Rockford because I'm so proud of the good things that are happening here. In a town like that, if you didn't show up for institutions, they cease to exist. It is the doers that made that town run. And in the past week or two, Rockford, Illinois is now the #1 hottest job market or housing market in the United States. That's the power of people seeing positivity in their community. So if you're looking for a new place to live with a relatively hot housing market, Rockford, Illinois. But I bring this up because all around the country, didn't matter where I was, people wanted me to walk away seeing the good in their community. Did not mean that there were not problems, but when people wanted to connect me to others, it was to the change makers, the positive people in a community. So that's the first thing that unites us all. People wanted me to walk away feeling good about their community because they were proud. The second thing is everyone wanted to be known and loved. And it feels very simple. It feels very kindergarten almost. But in this age of political polarization where people feel so mischaracterized, they feel like they can never be known. So how can they possibly be loved? Another thing I thought was very interesting is I would often hear from people at their dinner tables that, oh, America is going down the tubes. Our leaders are idiots. This country is not what it used to be, but my city's never been better. But my community has never been stronger. But great things are happening in my neighborhood. And I thought it was very interesting, this dual narrative of the country as a whole and what was happening around us. And it helped me realize that our local communities are a microcosm of our democracy. So I always need to say this because I've gotten into some tiffs here at some of these library events where people say, Ryan, this is extremely naive. The problems facing us are too big, and you think that having a conversation with someone is really going to change what we're up against? I don't think it's going to change everything, but I think it's a very good place to start. But the thing I always want to highlight is these conversations must be a two-way street. We must act in good faith to listen to someone else's point of view, to find a way to see their point, and then expect the same courtesy in return. And I'm not recommending that we sit down with our local neighborhood extremists. No, I'm talking about the people in our lives, the people we already have connections to. As someone who was almost murdered in New Mexico while traveling to all 50 states, I know that there are malicious actors out there. I've lived it, but I am choosing to talk about the positive things that I encountered across the country. Just needed to get that out of the way, that I was almost murdered. But storytelling is the greatest tool we have to change hearts and minds. I don't know, has anyone ever been in a political debate on social media? Has anyone ever seen one or been in one before? Well, we all know what the answer is, right? You share a scholarly article, you show some statistics, and that puts it to bed, right? Everyone leaves happy? Absolutely not. We live in a time where people can debate sources. They can debate facts, but you cannot debate someone's experience. It's a technique that mediators use in a courtroom or in a divorce. They allow someone to tell their story, to explain where they're coming from, to explain where they got their values, to explain sometimes how they feel they've been wronged. And after they get all that out, it doesn't mean that they are ultimately going to solve problems, but they are more open to talking to you when they feel that they have at least been heard. I think, and I apologize, I know that this is maybe a little crass, but I think sometimes we think about politics like we do kissing at the end of a first date. You don't show up and just kiss someone on the lips. You wine and dine them. You take them out, you get to know them. Maybe you give them a little caress in the arm, you buy them some ice cream, and then you get to the romance. Politics is like romance. Talking about politics is like romance. It doesn't happen right away. We have to sit down with people and understand where they're coming from instead of jumping right into it. We don't necessarily have the tools to have difficult conversations. And that is part of what has been so hard won over the past few years. It's been a difficult few years in America. We have had a lot of crises. We've had unrest socially. We've had health crises. We've had political crises. And we've been forced to have some really difficult conversations. It would be a waste to stop now. We need to get better at having conversations with people we disagree with. And I feel like a lot of us are currently in the stages of grief with politics. I don't know if anyone resonates with this. The stages of grief are anger, denial, depression, extreme depression, very, very extreme depression. It feels like we're constantly in this cycle, and it's normal, but we need to find a way out of it in order to start rebuilding the fabric of our society. Because changing someone's mind shouldn't be our goal. I can't get any of you to think exactly like me because you don't have my wonderful experiences. You haven't, almost been murdered in New Mexico. How can you understand where I'm coming from? Our goal should be broadening other people's minds, getting them to consider our perspectives when they make political decisions, and returning the same courtesy, finding a common understanding, pulling other people's lives into our orbit. That is what we should be going towards, because I think a lot of times people feel that they want someone else to think exactly like them, but we're not the same. We are a very diverse country, and we are influenced by our upbringings, our values, our worldviews. We must find a way to refocus the energy that we put into outrage back into our communities, because our society is designed for outrage. Do you see that there's always something new to be outraged about, whether it's a window display at Target or beer or a pop star? It feels like we are constantly bombarded with things that don't matter that we need to take positions on. And it takes a lot of energy, doesn't it? That energy should be channeled back into our communities. I noticed there are a lot of young people here tonight. I talked, yeah, got one laugh. I talked to a lot of schools, and one thing I hear from young people is that they feel despondent, that they feel like they cannot change anything, that they are powerless. And it's easy to understand why they feel that way. There are a lot of challenges facing us, but it's also on us as young people to step up. I tell this story. I went to Northwestern University for my undergrad. And when it was time for me to graduate my senior year, people would come up to me and say, "So Ryan, are you moving to New York, LA, Chicago, San Francisco, or Washington, DC?" As though there were no other options of places that I could live. I think we have a lot to learn from other places in the country. And when the narrative is that you go and get an education and you move to the biggest cities and compete for the most prestigious jobs, we miss out on an incredible opportunity for access to change makers, to bring ourselves to a community and find ways to make change. I moved to New York like an idiot, the #1 city in North America, and I felt that. I couldn't find community. I was competing for the same jobs. I put so much energy just trying to survive. It was impossible to sit on a board or even sometimes volunteer because it was so oversaturated. I learned on this trip that sometimes it's best for someone to move to a place where they can make an impact. And I think of the example of a woman named Joanna Beatty Taft, who lived in Washington, D.C. Joanna wanted to make an impact on the arts community. Do you know how many people want to make an impact on the arts community in DC? She was competing for the same jobs on the same boards, the same grants, the same volunteer opportunities. But when her husband got a job in Indianapolis, Indiana, all of a sudden she was a community leader. She was able to start a nonprofit that was aimed at keeping local artists in Indianapolis and providing them with opportunities to keep that economic ecosystem running. It was so successful that she was able to open up a charter school, all because of the leadership she was able to show in a less saturated place. We all want to live in our hearts in a small town, she told me. And that doesn't necessarily have to mean a literal small town. It can mean a neighborhood in a big city, but ultimately what we are all craving is community. That's part of the decision that led me to Kansas City, Missouri. I left the first biggest city in North America and went to the 37th largest city in America. It has been an incredible journey for me over the past 5 years, being in a place where I feel that I can make an impact. Because our communities are perfect canvases for change. They are the microcosms of our democracy. I was at a talk at St. Croix Falls, Wisconsin, and a woman was sitting in the front row and she was a teacher. And she said to me, you know, Ryan, I really appreciate all the things you're saying, but it's just too hard. The changes that have happened post-COVID have absolutely decimated the community at my school. 10 years ago, when we had a Friday night basketball game, people would line up out the door to get a seat in the bleachers. Now you're lucky if they're half full. So I don't know what we're going to do about this lack of showing up in America, Ryan, this bowling alone idea that Robert Putnam wrote about, that we're not showing up in America. And I said to her, you know what? There's nothing you can do to solve this trend in America. You're out of luck. But you can get people to go to that basketball game. You can get a group of students, you can get a group of teachers, you can get people excited in the space you can control. And that's maybe not going to change the world, but it's going to change the place you live, and maybe that will have a ripple effect beyond it. I think we sometimes think too big when there is actually so much we can do in the communities around us. Let's talk about high school dropout rates. It's pretty staggering the number of high school dropouts we have in this country. What can we do? Can we change that number by donating to a cause? Can we become the Secretary of Education and reverse course? Maybe some of us in this audience could. But you can show up at your local Big Brothers Big Sisters chapter and become a mentor to a young person. And once they enter that program, they are virtually guaranteed to graduate from high school. Just one person. Does it really matter? It matters to that one person. It matters to the person that sees you mentoring that young person and then decides to show up. There are things we can do, no matter what age you are. Our communities are the perfect canvas to make a difference. So that's what I tell young people, that going to a community that is a little smaller, it gives you access. It gives you the ability to actually see the changes that you are making in your community. And that might make you feel a little less despondent and make you want to tackle the next big challenge and get incrementally bigger. Our communities are the place we get the real heartbeat of America. Because remember, what's happening around you is also the story of America. It's not just what we see on the news. Because often we let these big macro narratives dictate how we feel about America. And it's very important to watch the news. It's very important to be informed. But it doesn't have to become the lenses through which we see everything going on around us. We can give ourselves permission to be open to good news. And I guarantee if you open your eyes to the good things around you, the lobster orchidea, there are good things happening. And sometimes we feel like we have to bear the burden of all of the turmoil in the world. And we have to wear that on our shoulders, and we're not allowed to feel proud or happy or see the good things going on around us. There are reasons to feel good about America. And I saw people all across this country showing up every day to make their communities a little better. And after they did that, maybe they would run for their local city council. Maybe from there, they would run for their state senate. Maybe they become governor. Maybe they would show up to their kids' PTA. It's about showing up ultimately. So sometimes I go to these talks and I say, you know, America's not as divided as it seems. And everyone says, wrong. Have you been on the internet? And then I need to amend my statement and say that we are not as divided as we seem on social media. Social media is an incredibly dangerous force in American politics right now. I'll say one good thing about it. It's an incredible tool to foster in-person connection. Maybe some of you found out about a certain library event on social media. It's a great conduit to get together in person with people. Or if you're, I don't know, trying to find a place to stay in all 50 states, that's pretty helpful there. That's the last good thing I'll say about social media. I work for a nonprofit that advocates for the mental health of young people. And there are studies about the very, very harmful effects of social media on young minds. There are 3 reasons that social media is so dangerous that I want to point out. The first is the way the algorithms are designed. Let's just talk about politics for a second. It is designed to show you the thing that makes you feel affirmed, that calcifies your worldview. And then it will show you something that absolutely inflames you. And then it'll take you back to your echo chamber where you feel at home, and then it'll show you something that inflames you again. And you rinse and repeat until all it seems like the world is people who agree with you exactly and people who are deranged and totally wrong, and there's nothing in between. That's how it's designed, because the short, pithy, really infuriating things get picked up. And that becomes the lens through which we see the world. Second thing is social media is just not a proper place to have a debate. Has anyone seen a social media debate that's gone well? Has anyone seen one successfully resolved? I've never heard of a single person that's seen that happen. And if you have, I want to hear about it because I want to put it in the talk. It is designed to amplify the loudest voices, the most extreme voices, and to show you things that you don't want to see. But the third point is actually the most interesting to me, because it locks people into a certain opinion. People put something out in the world, and all of a sudden, everyone sees it. It becomes their brand. And people don't like to admit that they've made mistakes. But in person, people are so much more willing to change their minds. Sometimes before I would stay with someone in their home, I would look them up on Facebook or see their social media presence, and I'd be like, whoa, we are not going to see eye to eye. But as soon as I went in that conversation, and maybe if they were a little farther to the right than me, maybe they were a Republican, maybe they're a hardcore Trump supporter, if I was willing to criticize some things that Hillary Clinton campaign did on the campaign trail, they all of a sudden would be like, okay, you get it. You can be self-critical. And I would ask them about things they were posting about, like, you know what? I had a few beers. I was having a bad day. I actually don't really know what I'm talking about. People are much more open to changing their minds when you're having a conversation with them. But what we see on social media is just the tip of the iceberg, and it lives forever. People are open to changing their minds. So what do we do about all this? Why am I here? Is it just a nice talk, something to pass the Monday night before we all go get ice cream? No. I want you to walk away with something that you can apply to your life. That's the only thing I really care about. The first thing that you can do to make America a little less divided is buy my book or listen to the audiobook, which is unfortunately 7.5 hours of just my voice. So that's actually a freebie. Don't do that. That's too much. The first thing I tell people at all these talks is give yourself permission to be open to good news in your community. It's a simple mindset shift that makes all the difference. $70,000 raised for this amazing library. That is good news in your community right there. Carry that with you. We can actually make a change around us, and we need to give ourselves permission to see that change is possible, and we can be a part of the change. Alexis de Tocqueville, who wrote Democracy in America in 1831, said that Americans are always forming associations. And that's what he loved about America. We're always coming together, forming clubs, bowling leagues, even groups of friends that are volunteering together. And I think that's really true. We don't have the history of Europe where we have the social cohesion built into our bones. We need to find it ourselves. And democracy is not a spectator sport. It's very important to vote. Please get out there and vote. But it takes more than that. It takes showing up in our community to make change, making our institutions run. Voting can become volunteering, can be organizing, can be running for something or starting a nonprofit or just getting a group of friends together to find a cause you really care about and doing something about it. It can be having conversations at your local library, but it requires us to show up. The second thing I tell people is to be a tourist in your own community. Show up. Use the power of social media to find out about events that you may not feel comfortable going to with people that may not have the same background as you. Go and volunteer, talk to people, meet them, work on this muscle of having conversations and listening. And I guarantee you will feel better about America and you will feel like you have more agency than sometimes the news allows you to feel. And lastly, and this is sometimes the hardest piece, harder than driving to all 50 states. One of the great pains for me about this period in American history, they're going to dinner. They're not walking out because of something I said. They told me beforehand. Thank you for coming. One of the great pains for me about this period of American history is the story of relationships that have been broken because of the meanness of our politics. The meanness is wrong, but what is even more wrong is allowing that fracturing to trickle down into our families, our friendship groups, and sometimes even our workplaces. It's wrong. It is a shame because it doesn't need to happen. I heard stories across this country of 30-year-old friendships that have been fractured because of politics. And I ultimately think it is on us to reach out to the people we may have broken with, to make the first move, to be the first one to listen, to then expect the two-way street to be built. Because what is the most precious commodity in our lives? It's our relationships. They take the longest to cultivate. And if you cut down that tree, you're going to have to plant another one. And it takes a very long time to build those back. So I say, if you have someone in your life with whom you've fractured, someone you know, not the neighborhood extremist, see if you can humble yourself. See if you can sit down, take a deep breath, and see if there's something you can say, I see your point on that. Because I guarantee once you find that one thing, you're going to find another, and another, and another, and another. And then the areas where you truly disagree will be thrown into relief. And you can have a real conversation about those, as opposed to gaslighting each other until you can't even have a real conversation anymore. When we let politics disrupt our friendships and our family, we let the division win. And so I ask all of you, will you be open to good news in your community? Will you show up to an event and volunteer? Will you meet someone new where you live? Will you consider reaching out to someone with whom you disagree? Will you choose to see our communities as the canvas for American democracy? Will you make the choice to be united? Will you make the choice not to take the bait of division? Because ultimately, the great thing about democracy is we decide. Democracy is the most hopeful form of government because we get to be participants in it. We can set things right every 2 years, every 4 years, in our local elections. We can organize, we can campaign, we can run for something, and we can correct the course. So I leave you with two things. I don't pretend that I've not heard at this point that this view is naive, and that we are hopelessly divided, and that the other side, whatever you may think that is too far gone. And I'll be honest, there are days when I am not optimistic. Unfortunately, I've built a brand around we're not as divided as we seem. And been to enough libraries now and it's on tape, so I can't really run away from it. But there are days where I feel really defeated. And I feel like things are not going to get better and things are spiraling out of control. But unfortunately, I have about 60 to 90 good years left of being an American, and I am not going to spend it being defeated. I am not going to give up on America. And so just remember, when people say that they think America's going down the tubes or that America is on a highway to hell, look around you. Look at the things that are real in your community. Think about your beautiful library. Think about your friend that is showing up and volunteering at the food kitchen every weekend. These are the stories of America too. And they are important to tell, because when we only tell ourselves doom and gloom stories, we miss out on the potential for change. I love my country. I love my community. And I know that it is the perfect canvas to make change. The last thing I will say is that what gives me the most faith is what is about to come, which is hearing from all of you. Yes, you will ask me questions, and yes, I will answer them, but that's not what's interesting to me. I'm going to give you 3 questions, and feel free to think about them during the Q&A. And hearing from you is what gives me faith, because I have seen tears, I have seen friendships resolved from just these 3 questions. So while you're doing the Q&A, think about them. The 3 questions are, what is something you've changed your mind on? What is something you would never change your mind on? And what is something you are open to changing your mind on? And there's just something about the power of being around people that you live alongside and having these discussions and telling your story that encourages other people to feel vulnerable and safe enough to do the same thing. So think about those questions, and if you feel comfortable answering, please do. And in the meantime, I will take some questions from Q&A after a lot of applause. Yes.
Yeah, well, I really like what you have to say, and I think there are probably other people in this audience that feel the way I do. I voted for both parties, but I think what's really scary right now is we have one party that won't accept the decree of the election, like in 2020, and in 2024 we're facing the same thing. I mean, that's basically why I'm here. I feel when you say, the democracy is splintered, when you have a whole political party that wants to steal the election, that's not democracy. So I think I'm looking for a way, we're in a blue state here, but I feel a sense of ominousness with this, the other party wins, because I don't feel like we're going to have a democracy anymore. Like I said, I'm a middle person. I'm very happy to vote for people from either party that I think are the best person. But when you have somebody who's saying they're not going to accept the results of the election, then you're basically, that rights taken away.
Thank you for sharing. Do you have a question?
So that's my question.
Okay. Okay. Well, I think it's really interesting.
I'll grab a microphone.
Okay.
I didn't know there was a Q&A. One second.
Surprise. So basically, this is the crux of it, right? What do we do about it? What do you think we do about it? What is the solution?
Well, I've never really gotten involved politically, but for example, the things that some of my friends do, like write postcards or whatever, but I think I don't feel like any small thing is going to make that much of a difference. I just want to know what you think we can do to ensure that we have a choice. That's all.
Absolutely. I'm gonna answer that because it's the biggest question at the end. And I think when we hear from everybody, I'll give you my my answer to that question because I think it's important, but I want to hear from other people first. Questions?
Okay, so this is all great, but your book, what did you find out? Are we divided as we think? I mean, I understand what you're saying, and I agree with you about talking to each other and doing everything we possibly can, but you went to all 50 states. Do you think are you just saying we're more alike than we think, than the media makes us appear to be?
Absolutely. And I think we are united by common interests when we talk about our communities. When we find the things that unite us first and start there, the things we care about in our communities. When I show up to someone's home in Wyoming and I am genuinely fascinated by the way they live or excited about them showing up for a local square dance. Those people that think, okay, Mr. Oxford, Mr. New York City is here to judge us. When I'm genuinely excited about those customs and I sit down and I have a beer with them or learn a square dance, ultimately they are more likely to listen to my thoughts and experiences as well. I think the problem is we're so siloed that we don't actually mix with people that we don't agree with. And I think that the big takeaway here is when we sit down with someone we think we disagree with, or the media has told us we're going to disagree with, there tends to be more agreement when we learn how to have the conversation, which is what is going to bring me back to your big question about how do you deal with people that will not accept facts?
One thing I found when because I did a lot of calling for Biden in the last election, start with a joke, make people laugh.
I tried to do that up here, as you noticed. They're okay. Yeah. That's humor goes a long way. Being self-effacing and self-critical and showing that you can laugh at yourself goes a long way. Yeah.
Curiosity question. How long did it take you for all 50 states?
Good question. It took me 5 months and 23,000 miles on my beloved car named Belinda, who I still have. She's a Prius.
I used to live in Washington where you could sit on a bus and in 10 minutes you would get somebody's life story. Didn't matter which bus, didn't matter which person. Did you find some states more open than others?
First of all, it doesn't sound like you're from Washington. Where are you from?
The other side.
The other side. Absolutely. I think I don't think it's so much about regions anymore. I think it's about big cities, people don't have time for you. Smaller towns, people are willing to sit and have a conversation with you. It's not necessarily a north, south, east, west thing. It's kind of about the size of the town. And I think people, when you're in a small town, are more naturally curious. Why are you here? What brought you to this particular place? Because in New York, there's a new person there every millisecond. So no one cares that you're there. I'm gonna let Jenna pick.
So how much time did you spend in each state and how did you decide? And I assume it was divided between cities and smaller.
That is a great question. So my criteria became 3 places per state: a large city, if it had one, a medium-sized town, and a smaller community. And if I was, I didn't put all of it in the book, but I found that when people connected me to someone in a particular community, I would build the itinerary around that.
Anybody on that side of the question? I feel like I'm favoring over here.
I wonder whether you also sought out some of the news media persons and discussed with them, why are you doing this? Why is your business doing this process of dividing and only emphasizing the extraordinary, the phenomenal, negative or positive? Why isn't the news media building community in its own community?
That is an amazing question. And I think it's very telling that I talked to a few people from the media, but one of the biggest names in the media that I interviewed had to speak to me off the record as she went on to criticize her, it was ABC at the time, but how they were conducting themselves. And I think that says a lot. If people don't feel like they can actually say how they feel, they're afraid for their jobs. And she said, I think that as journalists, we're the referees. We cannot be activists, and we just need to report the news, because if we're making people emotional and telling people how to react to the news, then we are deciding when to be divided or when something is a crisis. And I think one of the things about the Trump years that she really brought up is they would manufacture crises so often that when a real crisis happened, like not accepting the results of the election, people were so accustomed to crises. And they're like, oh, this is just another crisis, or people are blowing this out of proportion. And I think it's about perspective. And that's what she said. It's like the news should not decide the magnitude of an issue. They should just report the facts and let people decide. Yeah.
We've seen very recently, within a month or so, the NPR reporter, I've forgotten the name of the person, who actually turned upon the organization or critiqued it, saying, we are polarized. This organization, which purports and has in its name national public radio, has gone to one camp rather than the other, and is identified as such. So it was, I thought, an extraordinary confession of a national organization, and it has continued, I believe, to have repercussions within the organization, which is to be expected, but sad.
That is a perfect example. And to kind of go back to your question, which is the hardest question to ask. It is getting so good at the conversation with someone that cannot accept the outcome of an election, for example, to say to them, do you understand that if I am correct and the election was not stolen, it can just trust me enough to come into my world, come into my reality for a second. If you can believe that, do you understand how dangerous you're doing, how dangerous what you're doing is? It's getting that level of trust and getting them to see your perspective for a second. And if they're not able to do that, then it's a lost cause. But I don't think we're able to get someone to trust us enough and say, like, I'm not here to hurt you. I just want you to just admit that you could possibly be wrong. And that is the crux of it. We all need to admit, I could be wrong. I'm going to see your way for a second. And that can be very hard to do. It doesn't mean we give up our principles, but it is a delicate dance. It's like dating again.
Hi, Ryan. You talk about all the conversations that you've had with different people throughout the country, and you've obviously encountered a lot of different unique perspectives and opinions and things. But is there one overriding common theme that you encountered that kept on popping up in different parts of the country, that was a common thread that kind of tied everyone together, one overriding concern?
Yeah, and it's a little depressing. It's people don't care about me. People don't hear my story. People don't feel listened to, or that their community is important. Because the majority of the places I went weren't the epicenters of media and finance and commerce. I don't see my story on TV. I don't recognize myself in the news. And I think that is why I love this, because every single time I show up, inevitably those questions become people debating about what's going on in their community. Oh, they just passed this law about motorcyclists downtown, or they're trying to build this plant down by the elementary school. Those are the real conversations people are having. In Kansas City, where I live, for example, we were trying to decide if we're going to build a stadium downtown and the taxpayers were going to pay for it. That's what animates people. And that actually did get some national coverage. But I feel like people across this country don't feel like their stories and their everyday existence is being represented or told. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's where a lot of anger comes from.
Yes, there's a great book that just came out. It's not a great book, sorry. It's called The Fury of Rural America or something like that. And someone wrote a counter article to it in Politico. I wish I remember, but he's like, it's not fury, it's resentment. And resentment builds up over time. I don't know if anyone's ever been in a relationship with resentment, but it builds up. And if you don't acknowledge what's going on, that's when the resentment builds up and boils over. If you're never able to like have that conversation, say like, let's talk about what's really going on here. Like, what is this really about? There's another book called Why We Did It by Tim Miller, who is a Republican operative. And he writes about working for the Mitt Romney campaign and then watching all his friends go to Trump in 2016. He's got this great scene where he writes about getting absolutely blackout drunk with one of his old close friends that he worked in the Mitt Romney campaign with. And he's like, what is this really all about? And it took many, many shots of tequila to get down to just like, you don't tell me I need to drive a Prius. You don't tell me I need to have a Frappuccino. You don't. And I'm like, that is the entire, it's not about policy. It's about you don't get to tell me. And I think those are the human stories that really it all boils down to, because people are so fickle on policy. Oh, raise the taxes, lower the taxes, like raise the tariffs, lower the tariffs. People don't really care. And I think that is why this is such a big problem. We're not able to have conversations with our neighbors or validate other people's experiences. And that's where a lot of this consternation comes from. I think there are probably people that probably think Biden won the election. They're just like, I don't want to give it to them. I don't want to let them win. I don't want to like see their satisfied face when I admit, when they get to be like, see, you're an idiot. Like, I think that's what a lot of it can be about. And people are proud and people are not good at being vulnerable. And we're not good at letting people be vulnerable without punishing them. I come from a politically divided family. So that's kind of where this comes from. I see these things playing out again and again and again. And sometimes you just gotta like really lay everything out on the table. Sorry, I went on a little rant there. Yes. Okay.
Not all small towns are alike by any means. We've been to Summit. It's a delightful, wonderful place, a wonderful community. We've been to others that scared the hell out of.
Yeah.
I suspect you have similar experience in New Mexico.
True, the consequences of New Mexico, yeah, when the serial killer accomplices chased me in the truck after calling me a not very nice word, yeah.
Would you feel that was a vast divide between kinds of cities that we were, or small towns in particular?
I mean, it's like, what's the saying that Chekhov said, that every happy family is the same, all unhappy families are different. I mean, every community wears its history and its trauma on its sleeve. And I think some communities are more cohesive because they have people that care. They have a library that is beautiful that they can feel proud about. Someone started a farmer's market 50 years ago that gets people together. The happy cities have gathering places or meeting places where people can feel a part of a community. Casper, Wyoming, one of my favorite towns I went to, super cohesive. And one of the things I really love is they just have this talk news show that everyone watches, and you don't have to be a famous writer or a professor to be on the news show. They just have regular people from the community getting on and talking about what's going on. I was lucky enough to actually appear on the news show, and what we're talking about here is exactly what they were talking about there. So to answer your question, I think that there are places that have been left behind, small communities that don't feel like other people see them. And I'll tell one quick story. There's a town called Fergus Falls, Minnesota. And they, after the 2016 election, welcomed this journalist from the publication Der Spiegel, which is a German publication. My friend from Germany, there you are. So he came to the town, and the mayor of the town, who is a Jewish man who owns a pizzeria and organizes one of the largest arts festivals in Minnesota, welcomes this guy in, serves him pizza. They have a great time. The guy goes back to Germany, writes this article about how when you drive into the town, the sign says, Fergus Falls, Minnesota, Mexicans go home. Of course, the sign says Fergus Falls, Minnesota, real nice folks. But this journalist invented this story about how the mayor of the town showed him the guns on his wall and that he was threatened and harassed. And all these people are like, we are the biggest arts festival. We are this lovely small town that takes care of each other. And it doesn't mean we don't have problems. And that's the other thing is I think a lot of people want to be like, well, all the problems are in the small towns. There are no problems where I live. There are no problems in the big city. There are no problems in the blue east. There are it's all in the south. And I think that is people want to scapegoat the blame. Like, oh, the problem is the Trump country in Minnesota. There's none of that going on in Germany. The alternative for Germany is only getting bigger and bigger. So I think a lot of times people want to kind of shirk the blame onto other places, and it has an effect on the national identity. I think, to wrap it up, is small towns can sometimes be those scapegoats unless they have a point of national pride, like Columbus, Indiana, which is this amazing mid-century modern city that had a grant from a millionaire to build these amazing architectural gems, and that's an amazing thriving city because they have something to be proud of. Small town. Did that answer your question? Okay, good.
Hi. So I know you bring up one of the important themes of people wanting to be heard, right, and not being shut down, sort of just regardless of their perspectives. And I guess one of my questions is, how do we exist in a society where we can create an environment where you can have safe debate? The reason I bring that up is because I've tried to do this, and I recognize I'm going to say I'm the youngest person in this room. I have no idea who's behind me, but I probably am. And I think the reason I say that is because, like you also talk about social media, and a lot of young people, it's not just young people, but young people tend to use social media a lot. There's a lot of misinformation, opinions, and I've tried to create a group once where I was trying to say, all right, let's find a way where we can meet in person. I feel like I'd almost have to start a supper club because it hasn't worked. People are like, oh yeah, sure, I want to do it. And then nothing happens, and your crickets chirping. And there's times in our history when that was normal, right? When you would go to a club or a bar or wherever, and you would just, the men would have a conversation, maybe not, but it's really true. And I studied history, I'm a lawyer, I don't think lawyers we debate, but it's safe for us to debate in court, although sometimes it's not, it's considered acceptable. But why can't we do it? I just want to find a way that's reasonable and people are not so afraid. I would like to create an environment where that's possible, regardless of age and political background. And you're talking about romancing people. I feel like you give them food and they will come maybe, but they might also be threatened by this idea of just opening the floor to a conversation and letting people be heard so we can all face each other without being afraid or hiding behind social media.
Wow. Well, first of all, just a round of applause for all of that. I think that is an amazing question. And luckily, we're off to a good start. We're doing that. We're starting this here. I'm a part of an organization in Kansas City called American Public Square. I'm on their board of directors, and we do a lot of things. We started doing a lot of things like this, where you bring in a speaker and they talk about their book or someone who worked on campaign. The audience asks questions, and people said, you know what? I did a book event with them, and I did this thing where I asked people questions, and people were like, we like that. We want to do more of that. So we organized an event where we created these playing cards with a bunch of political questions. We served everyone quesadillas, food is very important. And these playing cards had different political questions, and people got together at tables and they talked. And was it perfect? No. People were like, I think we're really all sort of from the same political stripe. So I'm like, all right, the assignment next time is to bring a friend. Bring someone who you don't agree with, bring them to this public forum, and you need to start something that's institutional. So the library could host it. It's one of those things, you can't change the trend that political polarization and dialogue sucks in America, but there are resources to start something where you live. And it's not going to be perfect the first time. It's not going to be perfect the second time. And you're going to have to make different and better food, and the food needs to get way better to keep people coming back, but you can do it. I've seen it done. And so talk to Jenna after about starting it here at the library, but it's not easy though.
I wanted to, just your thing about anger and fear, I think that has so much to do with it. I think it's outrage, not just anger. But one of the things that's really stuck out to me lately is this new movie, Civil War. I'm not going to go. Well, what is that about? And what is it about that we're hearing now? All this stuff about it doesn't matter who wins, because if Trump wins, then we're all going to be living under an authoritarian government. But if Biden wins, the military, like what happened on January 6th, but multiplied. Talk about fear.
Yeah.
All over the place. And and I read this article about how the point of that in the media is coverage. They want you to pay attention so that they can make money. And how sad is that? I did want to ask one more thing. Can you recommend, I really appreciate what the woman said about NPR, because I've noticed it the last year or two myself. I mean, every day I try to watch a little bit of MSNBC and a little bit of Fox. And it's like, they don't even talk about the same things.
Different realities, yeah.
Totally different subjects, yeah. I'm trying to find, I mean, I've gone online, what is the most moderate, neutral, in the middle, you know, place that you can get news, accurate freaking news, without everybody's opinion about it.
So what's your name?
Kathy.
Kathy, I love you.
Outrageous Kathy.
I love you, Kathy. So the first thing I'll recommend is something called The Flip Side. It's a daily mailing list that sends you an issue every day. And then it will give you a bunch of articles and opinions on it from the right, and a bunch of articles and opinion on the same subject from the left. And the thing I love, and this is just the thing I love about American politics that no one talks about, is not everyone is just like blue on all these issues, red. Like there are times I'm like, I think I'm calling balls and strikes here. I think I'm actually more with the conservatives on this one. I'm actually more with the liberals on this one. That's a ridiculous argument. And you get good at toggling between the 2 points of view. So then when you sit down to have a conversation with someone, first of all, you need to know what you're talking about. And I think a lot of people get very threatened because they don't take the time to know what they're talking about. So they put up walls and like, Biden lost the election. Like, just like, but no, but I've done this research. Like, oh, you're smarter than me. You need to arm yourself with the information. And one of my toxic traits when I'm having an argument with someone, I'm just like, oh, do you know this thing? Do you know? And it really turns people off. So I think really knowing the facts and finding a way to say, hey, I've been doing research from the conservative side and from the liberal side of this one issue. Did you know this? I didn't know this. And finding a way to sort of spin the conversation to educate each other, because we can't be expected to know everything on our own. That's the other thing. We each have experiences and bring experiences to the table that are important. And that's something I always get to the end of one of these talks. I'm like, oh, I should have said this, but a farmer in Ohio knows a lot more about farming than me. And even though I went to Oxford or whatever, I'm gonna sit down with the person, that person's the expert. That person is smarter than me, that person can give me an education. I go read a few books on farming policy, I sit down with that person, I ask some questions, we keep up a conversation. It's not a one and done thing. And I think so to answer your question, I think finding experts in particular fields, finding local experts, finding local news, finding local opinions, and just sifting through those things, finding local podcasts about history, not even things that are going on right now. I think it is you're collecting information always, as opposed to collecting opinions. And that's what a lot of news is right now. Just here's the fact, and then let me extrapolate on it. Also, yeah. I'm gonna keep thinking.
I have lost you on the top.
Oh yeah, sorry.
There are a lot of neutral news, like 1440, and I have something I can share with you that's like a hierarchy of where all the news falls. Also, there was a book written a few years ago called Deep Listening, and it's about being able to have these conversations without getting them, by listening, by disarming the person, by hearing their point of view. So that's another resource.
Yeah, that's great.
Have you ever read the book called By the Woman Who Rode Across America on a Horse? It was a true story, but she found the same thing you did. I mean, she didn't have any money, and she just went to small towns, and I put her up, and we kept her horse in their barns. It's wonderful. It was a similar experience to you. But I also wanted to ask you, did you change your mind on anything?
Did I change my mind on anything? Yeah, I think the people always ask me this question, and I realize I've given unsatisfactory answers until someone asked me this last week. I'm like, I really got to have a good one. I used to think that a college education made you the expert. Kind of what I was saying earlier, that, you know, well, I obviously know more about this than you because I have a master's degree. But when I talk to people across the country, I had to face the uncomfortable truth of how little I really know about a lot of things. And I listen to audiobooks, you know, I do the work. But just sitting down and talking to a guy in Montana who works on an oil rig, and I'm sitting down and having lunch with him, and he's just like, you think you're smarter than me. You think you know more than me, but I need you to know that I built my own house. I'm like, oh, you saved enough and someone's building your house. No, I built my house. I put up the frames. I installed the electricity. Like, my kids live in that house and I'm building another house. And I was like, oh my God, I could never build I couldn't install a toilet. And that was a really disarming moment for both of us. And it really kind of helped me see that everyone has a part of the story. And that is sort of what I was saying earlier, that someone has a perspective that may not have a fact in it, but it might have a story or a way of thinking about something that might make me think about something different. Like, I'm not going to change the way I feel, but I'm like, this guy wants me to think that he is smart, and he is smart. He's smarter than me in a lot of ways. And I had to admit the number of ways that I'm stupid. So basically, I learned that I'm stupid in a lot of ways. And we all need to admit that we're all stupid and we all don't know. And we're all just trying to figure it out, which is a really scary and humbling place to be in. But I think that's a better place to start a conversation than, I know a lot better than you, and you're an idiot unless you agree with me. Yes, and you had a question too, which that's very good.
Let's talk about the vote. I agree with you that all politics is basically local. But you have a situation in this state, for example, it's solidly Democrat. Trump isn't even going to campaign here, to be sure.
Yeah.
You have a situation in the country today where only 8 states, swing states, there used to be 33 plus in the 50s and 60s.
Mm-hmm.
So outside of those 8 states, basically, voting is pointless. You ask me. Yeah, you can vote. You can vote in the local elections. You can vote in the state elections. You can vote to change something. But what it really comes down to in the end is, you live in Brentford. You live in a bubble. You have to realize that.
Yeah.
And this is a beautiful town, and we can do a lot of things locally. No impact at the national level, really.
That is exactly right. And we have the Electoral College, and that's not going anywhere, right? There were proposals in 2020 that was not received very well. I mean, my personal belief is, if someone wins the popular vote, wins the Electoral College but loses the popular vote, there should be a runoff election with 2 people, and there should be no third parties, because they're always spoilers, but I'm not in charge. I think more people, young people especially, this goes back to this, where you're going to move: New York, LA, Chicago, San Francisco, Washington, DC. More people need to move to these states: Madison, Wisconsin, Detroit, Michigan, Kalamazoo, Michigan, Atlanta, Georgia. These are wonderful places to live, and they are divided politically for a reason. I mean, Wisconsin, we have Tammy Baldwin, who is the first openly gay female senator. We have a Black lieutenant governor. We have a Democratic governor that voted for Trump one time and then Biden. Like, there is a conversation happening in these swing states. And I think it's important, for people when they make their traveling choices, to maybe say, I've never been to Wisconsin. It might be interesting to actually talk to some people that live in these swing states, like vacation there, make relationships, encourage your kids to move there. Because I said this and I got in trouble at one of these libraries. someone was kind of haranguing me about, well, blah, 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 what are you're not doing anything good by going around and saying this. I was like, well, why aren't you moving to Wisconsin if you care so much? Well, I can't move to Wisconsin, and I know people can actually uproot their lives and move to these places, but when democracy is on the line, you gotta put some skin in the game. And I think people need to be paying more attention to these swing states, at least going there, understanding them, building relationships there, maybe moving there. But I think one of the huge disservices that's done by this narrative that young people with educations have to move to New York or these big cities is it leaves these other swing states behind, and then the margin is decided by 20,000 people. So it's just, I don't know. But this is the way it is, and there's a lot of, I wish it was the way I recommended, but I don't get to decide right now.
So after visiting all of these places, why did you choose Kansas City?
Oh,
That's where I grew up.
Is it really?
Independence.
Oh my, Harry Truman's hometown, an amazing museum there. I'm from the Midwest. I saw you nodding when you talked about Rockville, Illinois. I wanted to be in a place that I felt I could learn things. I felt like I could have an impact, had a great arts scene, a great food scene, that Midwestern sensibility. But the thing that really sold me on it was walking around people. I unironically wore I Heart Kansas City shirts. And I stayed with a family that lived there, like, yeah, people just show up to things. People show up to the Memorial Day parade. And it's not like some people go to the country club, some people go to the park, but because they don't have enough money to go to the country club. It is just a very cohesive city that feels like it's on the up. Taylor Swift is there now. She's dating Travis Kelce. That's very exciting for us. And it sort of has borne out beautifully. Like, I write restaurant reviews in Kansas City. You think anyone would let me write restaurant reviews in New York City? Like, it's just, there are opportunities for people that are excited and want to show up and get involved. And as a young person, it's very exciting to be in a place where I am interested in something or I want to show up, and there are opportunities that come from that, as opposed to people saying like, yeah, you and everyone else, kid, like, get in line. And I've been there 5 years and I bought a house, so I can't leave. The interest rates were so low.
I'd like to follow up on the comment that was made about having conversations, a safe place. I think this library, this building, this room, and I would like to challenge the friends to initiate something of that nature.
Yes.
And, it's start with clearly non-political, inflammatory potential topics. Start with something like the green and greening the green more, or the things that we do agree on. How can we make them even better? Bradford Festival with our music on the green, or actually garbage can refuse. All the things that happen because everyone loves action. Start with something that you on neutral territory, and this is really neutral territory right here, a place of.
And have the good food too. That's a very. I think you had a question right there in the green.
I was just wondering, when I heard you say that resentment was at the basis of it, like I've always thought it was more fear of losing some kind of power, fear of, losing power, and that's under the resentment. So one of my questions was, did you try to get people to talk about what they're fearful of? And then my other thought was, how do you deal with, there's a large faction of people that believe that there's no separation of church and state in the Constitution. So if, and a large faction, I'm finding out more and more, and that's scary to me. So how would you deal with people if they said, and politicians as well, that, the Constitution does not have a separation of church and state?
These are the big questions that, and everyone else feel free to chime in, because I mentioned earlier that I'm an idiot and I don't know anything, but I think the first piece about it being more resentment, and less fear is I think people, I felt from my experience, and I went out on my way to talk to as many different types of people from as many different backgrounds as possible, and I got most of them. I didn't get the Amish, I tried. I think a lot of the divisions in America are about aesthetics. As I didn't get a lot of fear. I got a lot of people being like, well, I don't feel like I fit in this new America, or I don't like, why can't people leave me alone? Why do people have to tell me what to think? And I think that is more of the pervasive attitude I saw, where it's just like, people don't think I'm good enough. Like, people don't think my way of life is valid or important, as opposed to they're trying to take away. But then you have people like Trump, is like they are trying to take away your way of life. You hear like people are like, oh, I'm kind of resentful because they're telling me what to do, and then Trump is like, no, they are taking it away from you. And I think when we don't have conversations with someone that can say like, I'm not trying to take anything away from you, I'm just trying to say, let me have these books in my library. Or do you really care about we talk about religious issues right there. Like, if you know people who are religious and they believe the things that they do about the separation of church and state, unfortunately, you need to talk about religion. You need to get into that uncomfy conversation about, okay, you feel this way. Why do you feel that way? Okay, what if you're wrong? Let's go to the uncomfy space. You hold these religious beliefs. Let's say it's not real. If it's not real, then you'll never see grandma again. That's an uncomfortable thing. You have to get into these really uncomfortable places. And that sort of goes back to this idea that like none of us know, and people are performing certainty all the time. And so if you're going to talk about church and state, you got to talk about the church. And then you got to talk about the state. You got to get in those really awful, uncomfortable conversations that will ultimately lead to some sort of catharsis or understanding, because you're going to have to say how you view spirituality or the universe, or why we're here, the meaning of life, all these really big questions, because some of these big ethical questions are wrapped up in these things, but we don't want to go there. And I find that, having a glass or a bottle of wine helps, but ultimately they are wrapped up in these really uncomfortable discussions, and we need to get better at having uncomfortable discussions. Otherwise, we're just going to repeat the same talking points we hear on Fox News and MSNBC at each other. And I tell a real quick story, because a member of my family, after the January 6th insurrection, was like, this is just terrible. Like, this is the worst thing I've ever seen in my life. I'm so sorry. Like, this is just awful. And then the talking points started happening, then the Fox reruns, and then it became, oh, here's the script. Actually, it's this. Actually, it's this. Actually, it's this. And we couldn't have the real conversation anymore if I repeated the same talking points back. We are delivered talking points that prevent us from having a real conversation. That's part of the media does the thinking for us. And I'm not like wearing a conspiracy theory hat here, but it's just easy. It's easy to have someone just to tell you what to think. And it prevents you from getting those icky places that we have to.
I just wanted to say one more thing about trust. Trust is huge. I mean, I'm going to just share this. It's kind of comical, but really sad. There's a part of me that wonders if I can trust Woodside, if I can trust 1440. You know what I mean? It's like, what do you trust anymore? Who do you trust? I just feel like, and this is what my kids say, they're not going to vote. My kids are not, and my grandkids are not going to vote, because they think, I can't believe anybody. Everybody's corrupt. Nothing I do is going to matter anyway. It's just like, oh man, and so trust is a huge thing going on now too.
And I think that's this thing that's very naive about, like, let's talk about the good things once in a while. Let's talk about the library raising this money. Like, there are things you can trust. And I think the people that want to divide us benefit from us not trusting each other. And that's why we need to fight the urge and build that goodwill, build that trust, because the alternative is everyone just mistrusting every institution and us not participating in democracy anymore, because it's just going to hell anyway. So let it. And we have a good thing going here in a lot of ways. Like, we worked hard for this democracy. We live good lives. We have great things, and we have problems, obviously, but I love my stupid American life. Don't you? Don't you love the way you live? And don't you love your friends? And don't you love your house, and don't you love going to your kids' graduations and going to parties and birthday parties and getting that new bottle of wine and like watching the Super Bowl? Like, we have things that unite us, and when we don't give ourselves permission to say, I love my dog, do you love your dog? Oh, Christy Nome doesn't love her dog, but like there's a lot of things that we all like.
Kind of segues into my question. I'm right here.
Oh, hi.
Hi. I just wonder if maybe the question should be, what do you love about America instead of what's not working in America? I mean, I wonder how many answers would be the same. I mean, what do we love about America?
That is a great point. And there's actually another thing for you to maybe mistrust. There's a great organization called It Starts With Us, where they'll go around and Billy on the street and say, okay, what political party do you identify with? I'm a Republican. Okay, what's something you like about Democrats or something you respect about Democrats? And it just starts this, it's like in the debates when they ask Trump to say, what's something you like about Hillary? Like or I wish in more debates, like what's something you agree with on the other side? What's something you can see their point on? There's just none of that reflexive, like let's focus on the positive for a second. And ultimately, we as the American people are biting at the, oh, we like the, what do you hate? What's wrong? We like that. We're lapping that up, but we don't have to. We can change the tenor of the conversation, at least in this room. That's something I'm going to start asking people because it's such a good question. And it's something that no one talks about anymore because being earnest isn't cool.
I think it's really sad to hear you saying that your children or grandchildren won't vote. I think that is so sad because there's so many places in the world where people can't vote, can't have an opinion. And I don't think people realize that. I do think it's all about trust and fear, a lot about fear. The news media doesn't help that, that's true. But when somebody says, you know, I think going back to what you said about finding good, if somebody says, I'm not gonna vote, that's the time to really have a discussion about what that really means. And what does that really mean? And what are you giving up? You know, that's terrible.
Yes.
It's sad.
And I think finding the good sometimes is in contrast. We live in a society where there's no Russian Saturday Night Live, you know, there aren't people dressing up as Vladimir Putin and making fun of Vladimir Putin. That is a privilege in this country. We have the privilege of free speech, and that gets messy and complicated, but it's important to talk to your kids and your grandkids about the world that we've all of you have fought for and built and struggled through, and explain to them that it's hard, but ultimately it's a privilege. And sometimes finding the good means pointing out that the alternative is very ugly.
I have two comments. Number one, on the flip side, best part of that is the 30 to 50% of the time when they have the libertarian side at the bottom, or they'll give you an alternative view to the other two sides. And
they just started doing that like a year ago, right? Adding the libertarian. Yeah.
But it's interesting that somebody takes the time to come up with that third thing, which takes good points from both sides. And I think that's important.
The flip side mailing list. The flip side. I'm not in any way sponsored by the flip side.
But what I enjoyed the best is that you, in your talk, you touched on something that's very important to me, and that is that all politics are local. I believe that was something that OBJ was famous for saying. And I didn't agree with very much of what he said, but I read all three of the books. Of
the Robert Caro books.
And the Caro books were wonderful. But there was a lot of information in there, and he drove at the points of what gets people to vote. When you talk to grandchildren, where do they start to vote? They start to vote because they're involved in a local issue or the local organization. So we are fortunate and unfortunate to live in a condo community. It's only 52 units. But when I started to participate, I started to get to know people. And usually the first time I talked to them, they would say, you can't tell me what to do. And if you're on the board, that's exactly what you have to do. And so the gentleman who was at the time our president said, remember one thing, you always vote for 52 units, you don't vote for yourself or the guy next door. And sometimes that's hard to forget, but if you can remember it, it changes things. My granddaughter is 18 and her politics are completely different than mine, but she's involved and she's found her local people for the school board and for the things that she's out working to campaign for them. You can't get your grandchildren to figure out the national political thing. So don't start at the top, start at the bottom. In a small community, we're fortunate here. This is a nice sized town. We moved here from a very small town, Eastern Connecticut, less than 2,000 people. And the politics were they were very noisy. But when it came down to it, nobody knew. I served as tax collector, we were elected one for 12 years. Nobody knew what party I was with for most of the time I was there. So, because I was able to get both parties to endorse me, because all I cared about was getting money right. And all they cared about was having somebody when you walked into the tax office saying, hi, how you doing? What can I do for you? That was the concept that we worked with. So that was a very small town and it works. People here live in condo communities or neighborhoods. There's 6 or 8 nice neighborhoods in this town that all have some sort of mutual type organization. There's really no reason not to get involved. Talk the grandchildren into it. They can actually, in a town like this, you can actually get to know the first selectman because he'll talk to you. Yeah. And there's other people on the board that will talk to you. Angie Higgins lives in our condo community. We know her. We know who she is. Might not agree with her, but we know her. And you can talk to her. And so if somebody really wants to get involved in that, that's the level to get involved. You did it you actually did it on a national basis, but you can that's someplace. And this is a great place to start.
Thank you for showing up in your community and serving.
Take my mask off. Excellent conversations tonight. But one of the things that I was interested in your book was the question about electoral college. I believe in the very beginning of the book, you were talking about how you didn't feel that it was fair. That's not the way that you worded it, but it was something that needed to be dealt with in order to get a clear understanding of how elections are done. So my question is, when you did your travels and the question, were there any questions about the civics and how politics actually worked? And what were some of the comments or feelings about the actual mechanics of how elections work?
It's a great question, and I'm very flattered you read my book. I kind of like when people have just the idea of the book, you know, like when someone reads it, then they actually have an opinion about it. So thank you for. But I think the piece about the Electoral College, the point I was making in the book is sort of what I was saying earlier, that young people have sort of abandoned a lot of these swing states, and in my lifetime, the Electoral College has picked two presidents that did not win the Electoral College, and then governed with a mandate that they did not earn. And I think that's the very important piece. There's not the sort of, oh, this is a tight election, let's build consensus. And it goes back to this idea that people don't reward consensus. They reward, you know, you representing your friends in your condo because you're elected and that's your right. And so I think consensus becomes this bad word. Another thing I want to bring up that people are really excited about is referendums. Referendums, post Dobbs, referendums have been much more powerful than they've ever been. I live in the state of Missouri, and one of my best friends has been out there busting her butt, collecting signatures to get an abortion referendum on the ballot. Kansas is right over the border from me, two blocks away. Red state has not sent a Democratic senator to Congress since the 20s. passed abortion rights enshrined in the constitutions by nearly double digits. And Missouri is now going to have the same opportunity. So I think those statewide opportunities to find consensus are a really exciting path forward. But then you have elected officials like in Missouri that are doing everything they can to change the rules to prevent the will of the people as a whole from going about, oh, you've got to get a majority in, all the congressional districts or all these different things. And that is the thing that I really want to highlight is when people are afraid of the will of the people, we are in a very dangerous place. And I think we need to keep that conversation up. We should live in a utilitarian society where, like, what is best for the most people is what we should go ahead with. And I think when people feel that they won't be represented when the other side wins or won't be listened to, then it becomes an existential issue. So this is all sort of wrapped up in, there are ways for people to make their voices heard that isn't necessarily a governor's election or a state election or a presidential election.
So did you find some kind of feedback on what people knew about how politics work, or?
I would say people on the whole are woefully underinformed on the whole, but I saw a lot of local organizers that are talking about things like ranked choice voting, nonpartisan primaries, referendums. Like, there are these democratic tools in our toolbox that we don't talk about or use a lot. People are trying to overhaul the Electoral College, but we could institute, like in Alaska, ranked choice voting. There's a great book called The Primary Solution by a friend of mine, Nick Toriano, when he writes about basically how ranked choice voting will get more sane people in Congress who will then build consensus, be incentivized to build consensus with a lot of diverse communities. And you may not be their first choice, but maybe you're their second choice.
There was a very striking story in your book about Cleveland.
Yes, I sometimes read that one.
Skeeters.
Yeah, Skeet's Bar. Yes, I did not hire this man to talk about promises. Yeah.
Yeah, this was one that. Anyway, so the story about when you were at Skeet's, that it?
Yes.
I keep saying Skeeters. So anyway, you had one conversation in the bar, but then there was a person that said to you, a young person, that said to you, let's go outside and I'll tell you about the real story that happens here in the neighborhood. How did that strike you? And what were you thinking about when you heard that other story? The two very different.
Jenna, could you do me a favor and grab a book? We can close this out. If anyone's bored, you can leave. But I feel like I have to read the story because I usually, when I'm not doing a full speech, I tend to read.
I'm sorry.
No, it's great. I usually read this particular passage, and so I think it just sort of illustrates a lot of what I experienced in the book. Let's see. Oh, here we are. Okay. So this is me in Cleveland, Ohio. East Cleveland reminded me a lot of West Rockford in the 2000s. There was a general sense that a blind eye from the city government had allowed the infrastructure to fall into a state of disrepair, and a sense that the neighborhoods, like the Union Miles Park area, were not frequented by those in power. According to a map from Trulia, we were driving towards one of the highest crime intersections in Cleveland. Austin and I parked in the corner of 93rd and Gibson and walked up the cracked sidewalk to the door of Skeet's VSP Lounge. Should we wait for Ram? Austin asked. He glanced nervously at the intersection we just read about. Now let's go in. It was an after-work crowd inside of Skeet's. The appearance of two white guys in the all-black bar was not as nonchalant as I had hoped. We sat at the bar, waiting for Ram. I smiled back as people gave us curious nods or just stared. I'm glad I didn't make this a documentary, I thought, picturing rolling into the bar with a camera crew. Recording already gave a slight edge to conversations, and I couldn't imagine shoving a camera in someone's face and expecting them to be totally candid. There was no way to communicate that I was there to learn, not pull a stunt, and the question of what the hell are you doing here was clear in every suspicious glance thrown our way. I wasn't going to set the tone for the next 49 states by being timid. I took a deep breath and turned to the man sitting next to me. How's your day going? He smiled and shook his head, amused that I finally started to talk. What are you doing here, man? I looked around the bar where everyone was watching me out of the corner of their eye. I'm traveling to all 50 states to talk to people about their communities. All 50 states. Yeah, and Ohio was my first stop. The man gave me a high five. And you chose the best place in Ohio. Suddenly, the people who had been watching around the bar started gathering. What brings you here? He wants to hear about the neighborhood. You want to hear about the neighborhood? We'll tell you about the neighborhood. I discovered that I was surrounded by sheet metal workers, mechanics, and veterans who lived in the area for decades, some for their whole lives. Everyone I talked to seemed excited that I'd chosen Skeets as a place to showcase the Ohio state of mind. Rio, a straight shooter in a hoodie, stood and listened as the older folks at the bar told me how they had grown up with Hollywood actor Bill Cobbs and how his success had made him an icon of hometown pride. After listening to this, Rio approached, told me that he admired my hustle, and asked if I wanted to step outside for a recorded interview that didn't sugarcoat things. Outside, the streets were dark. Rio told me he didn't want me getting a falsely rosy impression of the neighborhood, and asked candidly what I was looking for at Skeets. The real Cleveland, I said, holding up my recorder. He nodded and pointed across the street at a bar called Cheers. Somebody just got kidnapped over there 3 weeks ago. Dude was coming out of a bar. They pulled up in a van, beat the hell out of him with a pistol, shot him in the head 2 times. He lived. Down the street right there, a little girl got off the bus from school, got snatched, killed, put under a porch, 14 years old. So how does this end? It doesn't. Not ever. In this area, it's not, because poverty is poverty, like shit. Who's to say we're gonna wake up tomorrow? And that's how we're living. That's all it is. It's about right now, Rio continued. If you ain't got a right now, you ain't got nothing here. I returned inside, shaken but thankful for Rio's commitment to candor. Though I was distracted by what I had learned, my reappearance inside the bar did not go unnoticed. I was approached by a bartender with closely cropped hair, Denise. She offered to show me a hand-painted mural in the backyard. I agreed. She took me by the hand and led me through the crowded bar, shouting, "Excuse me," every few steps. In the backyard, Denise stood in a leather jacket and pointed out faces in the mural of both national and local Black celebrities. Denise recounted the history of the mural with a palpable sense of pride as I recorded. She gestured at the bar. "This is all we have. Tomorrow is not promised to any of us. It's only by the grace of God that you're going to be here. And you should try to enjoy your life while you're here, because we don't know how much time we have left. I would prefer to love, and that's why I love this place." Denise's voice shook with emotion. It's all about love, all about acceptance, all about knowing that a person's going through something, just like I'm going through something. And I know I can come here and release it a little. Just Because by Johnny Taylor started playing inside the bar, someone cheered. "Do you think if there was a Skeets in every neighborhood in the United States that we'd live in a better country?" I asked. Denise grinned. "Yes, we would." I thought of the occasional isolating feeling of not having somewhere I belonged while living in the big cities. I think a lot of people feel like they don't have a place to go like this. They don't have a place that feels like family, I said. "And that makes me sad," she said, and she looked it. "Some people would say I'm just a bartender, but I refuse to close this place on a holiday because I know that I might have a customer who doesn't have anywhere to go. I cook every holiday. If I see someone walking down the street that might not have something, I say, come get yourself something to eat, because I couldn't rest thinking someone didn't have somewhere to go or didn't have a hot meal. We're gonna feed them. Not just me, no, we're gonna feed them. So what we do, baby." As we walked inside, I told Denise that today was my first full day of the trip and how welcome I felt despite being nervous about jumping in the unknown for the next 5 months. She shook her head and shouted at me over the swelling chorus of "Just Because." "You take this love you have here," she said, pointing at my chest like she was conjuring a talisman. "You'll meet some assholes, but everything's gonna be fine if you keep this love, and don't you forget it." She gave me a hug and disappeared behind the bar to greet a regular who had just walked inside. I looked across the bar to Ram and Austin, who were laughing and clinking their glasses with a group of 70-year-old men in coveralls. There wasn't a lonely person in sight.
The place to end it, we're at 7:40 now, when we will have time to folks or ask questions or chat afterwards, and we can close at 8, so I'm just gonna that.
Oh.
All my coworkers see that at 8.
Thank you to Jenna. Thank you for organizing this. And thank you to Nancy.